George, get a load of this! Discourse About Nothing is back with new episodes!
Jerry, please, don't make me listen again! How?
Just kidding, it's me, Pierce. I'm back at Discourse About Nothing, the only Seinfeld-themed philosophy podcast on the internet. I bet you thought you'd never hear my voice again. I bet you thought this would just be another failed podcast that 5 people listen to, maybe less. No, I'm committed. This podcast is going to be a total failure. 4 people are going to listen to it, but I'm still going to be putting out episodes. There's been some changes. Me and Matt are both busy. I'm finishing graduate school. I don't know if I'm going to go do a PhD. I just defended my long-ass master's thesis. It was way too long. It took way too much time and energy. And now I'm a broken shell of a person. So, I'm going to keep recording episodes. Matt's going to come on when he can. But I think we started this with more energy than we have. So today, I'm going to welcome my good friend Danny on the show. And we're just going to shoot the shit while we're in isolation from the coronavirus pandemic. He has a bachelor's degree in some stupid, I think it's like stupid English literature, something dumb like that. And his master's in theological ethics, which is also dumb.
I mean, yeah, I agree.
So Danny, welcome to the show.
I mean, I can't say that was a warm welcome, but I mean, it was a welcome. So good to be here, I guess.
Today, we're talking about coronavirus. We're not going to give you a breakdown of all the news because you don't need it. You can just go on, your normie CNN, your normie MSNBC. You can look up all the death tolls. The United States is sucking in their response. Everything's bad. Hospitals are already starting to be overrun. A lot of them are. Toilet paper is out. How am I going to wipe my ass? I don't know. Danny hasn't wiped in years preparing for this.
I have been practicing, yeah. Also, leaves are pretty good. It's a good sustainable way to do that without using paper products. So I would recommend
Well,
that.
you've got to
for sure.
find like a soft leaf because most of the leaves here are still kind of dry and brittle, so they're crumbling. Anyway, we're talking about coronavirus, and we're not bringing you the news about coronavirus. We're going to start talking about our reflections. This is now almost the end of week 4 for me of quarantining myself because I have an autoimmune disease. So I've been stuck in my house and in my front yard for 4 weeks now, and I've had a lot of time to reflect on some of the spiritual and ethical dimensions of coronavirus. And I feel like my eyes have been opened up a little bit more to reality as it truly is, or the human condition, if you want to say it pretentiously. Let's just start out talking about how we're feeling. How are you feeling, Danny? How are you doing? How long have you been isolated?
Honestly, I don't even know. When you said 4 weeks, I was trying to think of how long I've been doing it. I think, let me check. I mean, I really have not kept track of time. I barely know that today is Friday. I think I've been on isolation for, 4 weeks as well. Doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I vacillate between thinking it's been like a year and thinking it's been like a day. Apparently, it's been 4 weeks. It feels like an eternity to me, but I'm like really out of it. My anxiety has been awful. Emily told me yesterday, it is Lent, so we're not supposed to be breaking the Lenten fast, but because I've been so stressed out, I've been eating comfort food. I've
Mm.
eaten 6 pizzas by myself in 2 weeks. And I have no memory of 3 of those pizzas. I remember
Wow.
3 of them. I don't remember the other 3. So I have, no concept of time. My memory's shot. I've just been like super stressed out.
And you're still on like your regular rhythm though, because you're still like doing work and you're still teaching and grading and writing papers and stuff. I've been a loose boy. I've been
Loose boy.
yeah, waking up at different times every day, going to sleep at different times every night. Some days I'll be productive and I'll record a podcast. Some days I'll just read. Some days I'll be just in bed. Some days I'll like take a walk. So like it's been like just like a very odd summer vacation to me that's been very cold. Um, so yeah, the sense of time has been thrown away for a while now. It's interesting though because like I mean, and I'm sure this is something that'll get brought up later, but like we, even though we're in different places, we're still relatively way luckier than most other people because while you still have a job and you have routines, I still have savings, so I'm not really that worried financially. But then there's other people who like have neither. I mean, they've been laid off and they don't have financial security, so they don't have routines or money. So like, what are they doing?
Yeah, I'm grateful that my wife has a stable teaching job online, so she's not getting exposed. And then for the next month and a half, I have graduate school income and stipends and health insurance till July. So yeah, we're definitely, me and you and my wife Emily are much better off than a lot of other people, especially our age. Once I started realizing that, I became a little less anxious and more grateful because even though, yeah, like things aren't good for us either, um, they are not at this point life ending. It's not the end of the world for us, but for a lot of other people, it will be. And
Yeah.
I guess that can get us into the first topic, really, is how coronavirus is forcing us to take a look at a cold, hard, long, flaccid look at reality.
I'm very familiar with the flaccid mindset.
So, coronavirus has forced me to step outside myself and look at reality, look at how the world really is. Because I haven't had the distractions of everyday life of having to walk to school, having to lecture in person, having to go out of the house to study, to the library, do all the normal chores that I do. And it's really forced me to, even though I'm super anxious, kind of take it slower, journal, and think more instead of go out and absorb more information, instead to more quietly reflect on things. And I have honestly been made really sad and angry with myself and with everybody else because I've realized how blinded I've been by our daily routines and comforts. I have it so much better than millions of people around the globe, and still I feel like I deserve more. And it's not even that I felt like I deserved more. I guess the full picture that kind of sums up the change that this has caused in my perspective has been that I've kind of expected or thought it attainable happiness and like a good fulfilled life in this world. And I just don't see why I should be able to even expect that comfort. I think everybody has a right to that comfort because human beings are beautiful creatures that deserve to flourish, but that we can actually expect that it will happen. Life is much more fragile than that. Finances and health are much more fragile than that. And I think it was selfish and narrow minded of me to expect that my life was going to be any better than a poor person in India or even a poor person in the United States. And I think I've really come to see that the history of mankind is like a fragile, precarious history full of unnecessary evils that we've perpetrated on each other. And my sense of security in life, my expectation of happiness and security has been completely shattered. But that hasn't actually, it's actually made me a little bit more peaceful and content with the world because now it feels like I actually understand what life is.
I think you're right. A lot of illusions have been shattered. There's a lot of things that I really uh, enjoy in the art world. Both of us are artists in different capacities. Um, but I've definitely thought of like, I mean, when I was younger and more idealistic, I always thought like, oh, how cool would it be to like move to Europe or something, or like move to Latin America or something like that. And I quickly realized like the art scenes over there are like completely different than in the United States because a lot of them don't have the funding and like the social resources that it takes. Here in the United States, I mean, literally any city you go to, you'll find open mics for either music or comedy. Whereas in like even a place like Germany, like I don't understand how stand up works over there. I've heard of like maybe one comedian from Germany, and he's like a YouTuber. So I don't know how like art works, even in like a very uh similar country to ours, like Germany, let alone a place like Belize or like Honduras or something.
I didn't think about it from how you're approaching it right now, but it's interesting because basically what you're saying is you've just presumed that your way of life is sort of universal. So your way
Right,
of life, you've as like a consumer of media, comedy, art, and as a creator, you can just because you're well off in the United States, on any given day, if you want to create art, you pretty much have the ability to do it. If you want to indulge and consume art, you just go on Netflix or Criterion Collection, or you can go to a open mic or something.
right,
And we both just assume two things: one, that art and media is going to be there for me to consume whenever I want, which is a really, I think, narrow-minded expectation that like, oh, we just have whatever we want all the time. But the other more fundamentally strange thing, it seems strange when I say it now, but it doesn't when I thought before, is why should we expect to have the ability and the right to be artists and to create music and to do photography or videography?
right. It's a presumptuous way of life.
So our entire romanticized way of living, where we just think about, I want to go make art, I'm going to get up and go do it, like that is so privileged. And I'm not saying it's bad, I wish everyone could have those opportunities, but that we assume that that's the kind of default around the world and even in our own country shows how narrow-minded and boxed in to a false sense of security we are.
Yeah, I completely agree. My parents are immigrants. They came to this country and they built a life. I mean, thankfully they got super lucky and they built a life for me and my siblings that allowed us to do the things that you were saying earlier, like, oh, we could just do whatever we want. If I wanted to be a surfer, like my parents were ready and willing to pay for lessons and a surfboard and whatever like that. I mean, the arbitrary path that I chose was to do art, and I mean, thankfully I've had the opportunity to do that, and the financial backing and the like relative security from my parents through like they're providing me health insurance and stuff like that through my dad's plan. But again, like my parents, their dream was literally to just get to this country. I mean, my dad's dream for the longest time was like to work in a factory. Your material circumstances frame the possibilities that you even desire or can even think of.
At this point, like that sounds great to me when I think about it, because I realize now how precarious and how bullshit my career is as an academic and a philosopher. It's totally privileged. And yeah, now that I'm about to graduate with my master's and probably not go into a PhD program and probably not become a professor in a university, I realize I don't have anything else to do now. And that sort of stability of factory actually kind of seems nice.
Right.
But even me romanticizing it like that is, I'm thinking about it in terms of like from the lens of even though I don't have that much money, the mindset of an upper class selfish a-hole.
Yeah, it was one of many options for you. Like, oh, I could do that, or I could, become a teacher, or I could, start a restaurant or whatever like that. Whereas, like, that was like the goal, the one goal for my dad and for,
So yeah, that reworking of our overall, especially my mindset. I mean, I've been in a process of a very painful 2-year long conversion into the Eastern Orthodox Church that has involved a lot of spiritual and moral epiphanies. That's a weird way to put it to me, but more just like rewiring of my paradigm or outlook on the world. And just seeing how messed up and selfish I am for these sorts of thoughts that we're covering. Like I'm actually like upset with myself as I talk about this right now. It hurts me because now I know people who are genuinely suffering. And it's like, why should I be able to see or have a life that get to feel as though there are many options for me while they suffer? And I think you've had a similar shift too, from what you're saying, is like we're both realizing the pandemic is making us slow down and realize like how fragile everything is and how naive we were. But let's get into the details of what that looks like too, because we hit on a lot. I kind of want to unpack it. So here's the first detail that I've realized. The expectation that our lives are going to be happy leads us to put as a standard for what we'll put up with or what we'll pursue that it has to make us happy, or that it can't burden us or inconvenience us in some way. And I've realized this since being in isolation with my wife. Like, we're getting along fine and everything, but there are definitely flaws in our relationship, and a lot of those flaws come from me. And my wife putting up with those things, if she were to think, like I have often thought, I shouldn't have to put up with this. Like, Pierce's insecurities or his anxiety is really taking a toll on my mental health and happiness. I know a lot of people, and myself included, that would let that factor in to a calculation to where in your head you're thinking, should I leave this person? Should I continue to put up with this? And you're treating relationships as though they stack up on how much they make you happy or how much they make you unhappy. And if the unhappiness starts to outweigh the happiness, then it's not worth it and you just leave. Not just in the context of marriage, but in the context of friendships, in the context of any pursuits that you have. So if something is hard to pursue and you think overall it might actually like shorten your life through stress or stress you out so much that you kind of don't want to do it, even though you think it's a good thing to pursue, the mindset of thinking I need to pursue happiness and a stable life and security and pleasure, that will lead you to end up thinking, if something's going wrong, if something's less than ideal, I shouldn't be doing it. But the reality I'm coming to realize is everything about our world pretty much is not ideal. It could be better in almost every respect. And we can't expect in our relationships and in our pursuits to have an ideal state of things. But that doesn't mean they're not worth pursuing. And that doesn't even mean that we're not obligated to pursue them. I should be more willing to sacrifice. I should be more willing to do difficult things that might even kill me if they are actually good things to do, even though it will hurt my mental health. And even though it will maybe even ruin a day or a week or a month if there's a problem. But I shouldn't run away from that problem or pretend like it doesn't exist. I should face it, and I should sacrifice my own happiness to do, I don't know what you'd say, the beautiful thing, the honorable thing. Thinking about working a career in education and philosophy, I've been very angry because I think the university system is corrupt in a lot of ways. Like the school I'm at, Oklahoma State University, pays their head coach $5 million a year, and their assistant coach, I think, $3 to $4 million. And those are almost 200 adjunct jobs that could be lifted up to full-time pay with benefits. But they concentrate all their wealth in their stupid football coaches instead of academics. That before made me think, I don't want to have anything to do with this system, with universities, because they behave like that. And I think there's still something to that. But at the same time, now I recognize I could still be doing something good by working in them. Or maybe I could think about it from the other direction. I do want to be a college professor, but maybe I should sacrifice that happiness and comfort and, in quotes, condescend like a lot of my colleagues think of it and teach junior high and high school, because those kids need good teachers that actually know things and are well educated. I'd make less money. I might be less happy. I might have less pleasure. And I definitely won't be around colleagues who are philosophers and liberal arts people that I could talk to. But maybe that's what I need to do. Maybe my life doesn't deserve to be happy. Maybe I should go help those kids. Who knows? But that's the overall picture that I'm trying to paint with this first detail is I I can no longer deliberate practically and decide what to do based on how much it inconveniences me or makes me feel bad or makes me feel good. From my perspective, that doesn't make sense in terms of ethical reasoning anymore.
In regards to what you were just saying, I completely agree that it's really, really difficult to do any sort of calculus. But I mean, mostly because it's extremely difficult to quantify how much a thing or a person or an experience gives you pleasure or displeasure. I mean, sort of like the reductiveness of that aside, like I feel like that's just hard to do. And then once we acknowledge that, I think we could take it a step further and be like, I don't even think we should be doing that. Not only is it impossible, but it's also like I said, very reductive and I think wrong. Because again, it's very solipsistic and selfish, really. I mean, when you're just considering your own happiness and pleasure. The other thing is that in terms of, I mean, on the other side, you were talking about different contexts in which you could be helpful and doing the math on whether you would be able to fulfill some sort of purpose and be helpful to people in the university versus in a junior high or high school. But I think similarly with that, like that's also a calculus that's extremely difficult to do because yeah, and in terms of what you can do now, I mean, that's gonna depend on who you are and who you live with. I mean, for you, you're facing choices and a burden that I don't face, and that's interesting. That you, I mean, essentially have to choose like how you want to communicate all this with your wife and how she is going to communicate everything with you. Whereas for me, I don't live with anyone that I'm close to per se. So, I mean, essentially the best thing I can do is just call my parents and stay home, essentially. Um, at least as far as I'm aware, but I don't know. What should I be doing? I mean, that's a good question. That's something that I've been thinking about. As you were saying earlier about the naivete of presuming one is going to have a happy life. I mean, to add to that, I mean, I've definitely been like guilty of having that naivete as well. But another thing that I've been naive about is having like basically that my death is going to be meaningful, essentially. Like there's going to be like a very complete arc to my life. And to and my death is going to be like a nice little bow that wraps up the whole thing. I mean, that's like a very selfish naive thing that I've thought of for a long time, and have not really recognized that until recently with the coronavirus.
Yeah, why should we expect our own individual lives and even our own individual deaths to be these beautiful, meaningful things instead of these almost absurd, painful deaths from, say, coronavirus, where we're not allowed to see our family in our final moments. Our family doesn't even know we died. We're in a hospital room, isolated, quarantined, alone. We don't get to have a funeral.
Yeah,
That's the reality, but that's also the reality of most people through history. You don't just get this nice life where you spend $5,000 to $20,000 on a casket and everyone gathers around and mourns. And that's not even a meaningful death, right? For the
right.
most people. Why should, when even the rich in this country, their funerals and deaths are meaningless, much less the poor people throughout history and alive right now are going to have meaningless deaths? How self centered are we to even think that, to expect or predict that that's how our lives are going to be? And I'm not saying, and I don't think you would say this either, that it's wrong to want that. In fact, the idealism and wanting to be happy and wanting other people to be happy and wanting to have a meaningful death and beautiful life, those are things we should all strive for. The problem is to feel and just naively assume that the world is such a way that I have a good chance of that means that you are fundamentally disconnected from reality and you see yourself as the center of the world.
The more we sort of break down how naive and foolish and like possibly even evil most people's views of the world and of themselves are, uh, the more I also think of like, well, I what should people think? Because naturally, if people think the way we do, I mean, I'm assuming like, and I'm not even saying this facetiously, like if people genuinely faced the facts and saw the world the way we're describing right now, I mean, why shouldn't uh, the number of suicides per year like go up? Like 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 what's the point? What's the thing that's keeping us going? I do believe it to be eminently true that to think selfishly, to have that sort of optimism is foolish. But like, how do you find some sort of purpose or satisfaction or joy even otherwise?
We've seen that our way of conceiving of the world is naive and selfish. But what else do we have? What alternative is there? How do we conceive of the world? How are we supposed to do that? What sort of paradigm or perspective are we supposed to replace our self centered perspective with? And what sort of ethical criteria can we adopt to decide what we're going to pursue, put up with, value, love, without losing hope and becoming nihilistic and suicidal, and at the same time without falling back into that naive selfish optimism where the world is your playground? Like, what do we replace that with? Because we've seen from how fragile life is and how hard it is to make predictions, how your own happiness is fragile and it's also self-centered to expect that you get it, and even trying to live for the happiness of others is futile. What paradigm do we replace it with? So I'm still in the process of trying to find that way of conceiving of the world and my place in it that's simultaneously going to comfort me, console me, and ward off despair, while at the same time not lapsing back into that selfish solipsism where I'm the center of the world and everything's going to work out for me. Before we start talking about solutions, there's one more aspect of our worldview and of our daily lives that is, to me, the most disgusting part of myself and of everyone else we know. And I've been aware of it for a while, but I've still been doing it, and it's really wrong. Our lifestyles are built on the backs of other people's suffering. Our using Amazon and giving them money is built on inadequate working conditions for those employees. Our buying goods from China involves buying things from sweatshops and perpetuating an unjust, immoral system that creates suffering. And we're not only assuming that we are somehow worthy more than everybody else in history to have good lives. We're not just hoping for that and expecting that. We're also simultaneously expecting happiness and pursuing it through means that rips it away from other people. How
Right.
disgusting, how fundamentally awful that is, whether we realize it or not. That's wretched. That makes me want to throw up because I have $1,600 on an Amazon credit card.
Mm,
That's a lot to contribute to that stupid company, and
yeah.
that's the least of it. Because then the products I buy on Amazon are from China in practically slave conditions. Um,
Right.
so yeah, not only am I pursuing my own happiness as if I'm the center of the universe, I'm also doing it at the expense of others. So I'm basically saying, whether I realize or not, I'm more important than everyone else
Yeah. Yeah.
to a very disgusting degree.
Right. The irony of all this that is so I mean, like what you pointed out is just so sickening and baffling, but I feel like that's compounded further by the fact that like I think I'm quoting a movie here. I can't remember where this is from, but it's basically like, oh, like I wish I could afford principles, basically. Because everything that you're just describing right now, is absolutely true. Um, and I mean, maybe Amazon isn't a great example, but like, let's take another company that's just as evil, like Walmart, that routinely abuses its employees, or let's not even take a company, but like a whole industry, like you know, the industry that like processes chickens and cows and stuff like that. Like the most principled people I know are vegans and people who shop at places where they know exactly where they're getting their products from, and it's all like ethically sourced and everything like that. Like all that's like insanely expensive.
Yeah, I mean, for most people, and I mean, this is true of me too. Like, I don't have that much money. My wife is a public school teacher in Oklahoma that makes very little. I'm a graduate student that makes very little, and I'm losing my job. So it's like, yeah, I have to shop at Walmart. Imagine people
Right.
even poorer than us. They can't unplug from this system that's built on suffering and evil and greed. So I'm not even blaming them. The thing is, the more money you have, the more aware you are of this, the more disgusting and selfish you are. Like the poor people doing it are doing it out of necessity. We, with better opportunities, we're just like, we're really, really guilty of this once we realize it. Um, so yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I sympathize with that completely. I've gone pescatarian over the last year, and there's been a couple of times where I've like eaten meat and I
Mhm.
feel really bad, but it's like I really want meat sometimes. It's like
Oh, it's
how
great.
like selfish is that I could really believe that like factory farming is bad and it's
Right.
also bad for the environment and it's there's all these factors that will lead to more suffering of humans and animals and the world. But
Hmm.
then I also go, "Oh, but I'm kind of hungry for chicken. Like I'm really craving chicken, so I'm going to have some." Like what
Exactly. Yeah.
the hell? Like that's just like it's so selfish. So selfish. But like a poor person saying that chicken's cheaper than fish, than good fish. They're not culpable, or at least not to the same degree.
I mean, I have the principles, but I just don't. I mean, I'm a hypocrite for sure. I'm fully willing to admit that. But I hate. But that's such a comedian thing to do. Because I'm not to say that I'm a comedian, but like I feel like we have this like type of person in our culture that this category most often gets filled by comedians, where it's like, yeah, I'm a shitty person, so what, kind of thing. You know, I don't want to be that person. You know, even though it's funny, I don't want to be smug about that. And I feel like most comedians are, and the reason I bring up comedians is partly to mention that, but also partly because I remember I watched a show a long time ago with Hannibal Buress, and he was basically provoking some vegan protesters on the street, and of course, you know, they were out with signs and they were saying like, you know, consumption of meat and of animal products is bad, and Hannibal had like what I thought at the time was a good point, which and a comedic one at that, where he was like, "Yeah, but don't you realize that if you don't eat all this meat, you're just wasting meat?" But it's like, well, I mean, if you significantly like curb the demand for these products, hopefully these companies will give in to that. But I mean, again, it's a numbers game. I mean, unless enough people do that, then I mean the problem's just going to continue.
That's perfect segue as well into this next detail. And it's that we see our own actions as being the end of uh we see our own moral improvement as being the end of our actions. So in this case, you're saying, look how ridiculous it is. We think that just by giving up meat or eating less meat, that's really going to help the world. It's actually not. The point of the action isn't making us more righteous or something. It's actually to stop destroying the earth, to stop killing animals needlessly and making them suffer, to stop hurting other people. And again, like seeing just our becoming vegetarians or pescatarians as just like, oh, I'm doing my part because I'm not eating meat. That's not the point. The point is to stop being to reduce the suffering in the world, but also to encourage these companies to create less suffering, right? It's
Yeah.
not just about us. So that's another way of seeing it as like, even when we're talking about being less selfish and doing good things, we're still seeing it as us, the individual. It's centered
Right.
around.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's Lent right now, and we're doing the fast. And the fast guidelines for the Orthodox Church are pretty much like full vegetarian or vegan during Lent. And for really like half the year, you're vegan if you're following the liturgical calendar. And there's all sorts of recipes that we found online to be in conformity with the official rules of the fast while at the same time not having to give up that much. And I've realized this Lenten period that that's not what Lent is. That's not a sacrifice. And so overall what I'm saying is that seeing ourselves as reducing or giving up our pleasures that come at the expense of immorality or the destruction of beauty and goodness in the world, we see those things as sacrifices. And that in itself is revealing to us how self centered our paradigm or worldview is. Because just refraining from doing something that destroys a beautiful work of art, that's not praiseworthy. You're not making a sacrifice. You're just not being an a hole.
Yeah, it's just the bare minimum.
It's the bare minimum. You're not praiseworthy for being uh for refraining from killing people, right? That's just what's expected of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Lent's been hard because it's also been with the pandemic, and one of my comforts for my anxiety is like eating. Um, so I let myself have a couple pizzas that I don't remember having, I guess. Uh, and then I realized I prayed and basically said like I'm doing. I This sounds so cheesy saying this, and I told God, I am intentionally doing this because I just can't handle doing the Lenten fast, but I'm going to do it most of the other time. And I've kept it for the most part, more than I ever had in my life, but I still see myself and I can't shake it. The way I consider myself doing Lent is as a sacrifice, when in reality, I have slightly less pleasure. Slightly less. I'm not making any real sacrifices. I'm not uh I'm not inculcating in myself actual pain or suffering in order to atone and to show repentance, which is what Lent's supposed to be. I'm just like having a great time, just like not eating a couple things I like. And that is really gross to me, and I am very guilty of that. Essentially, what we've been saying for the last probably going to end up being 30-40 minutes is all of these details about our worldview and how coronavirus and this pandemic has exacerbated or strained those details of our conception of ourself and the world. It's revealed that our moral outlook on the world, and maybe even more fundamental than morality and ethics, but our way of conceiving of the world is not only naive, but it's self centered in that it tacitly involves seeing ourselves as more worthy of happiness, of more important, and putting more emphasis on our own subjective pleasures and psychological states than not just those of others, but those of the world as a whole. We are seeing ourselves not only as individuals within a group of humans, but as individuals that for each of us, our own individual selves, are king above and rank far above all of the other people around us. And not only is it futile to see the world like that, because that's not how the world works, and you're going to be sorely disappointed if you continue living that way and pursuing a life where you are the king and you are the most important member of your species. It's also, I would say, my moral intuitions say that that's unethical. The details have been we make our lives about pursuing our own happiness. We make our lives about even pursuing the individual happiness of other people. We hope that and kind of expect our lives to end in ways that will be meaningful and not just absurd and random. We see the suffering of other people and go, thankfully I'm not them, but we don't reach out to help them. And we see our own sacrifices, quote unquote sacrifices, as somehow praiseworthy, when in reality, the sacrifices we make are just doing the bare minimum. They're not actually praiseworthy. So all of those things indicated that our way of seeing the world is corrupt, self-centered, naive, and futile. So what do we replace it with? What other way of conceiving of the world and of prioritizing ourselves is there?
There definitely needs to be a reorientation of values because I mean, like you said, in like a traditional American value system, like the individual is king, the individual is paramount. And I think, though, at first it might be destructive and discouraging and perhaps even self-alienating to think that the world is bigger than the individual. I think ultimately it is I mean, once you enter sort of a paradigm shift, like you see that acting as part of something that's bigger than yourself and acting on behalf of something bigger than yourself is a beautiful and like rewarding thing. Within the original paradigm where the individual is king, like reckoning with the things that we've been talking about, that life is not promised to be happy and not in like death even isn't promised to be meaningful. Uh I mean that's a scary thing. But if you're operating on the other paradigm where you're part of a collective, the story goes on without you. Things move on, things continue to exist, beauty continues to exist without you. Like that's a wonderful thing. So I think shifting our thinking as consciously as possible. I don't know how to do that per se, but just trying to do that is I think a worthwhile pursuit, and I think that's a good starting point. Uh, and one that's pretty accessible. I mean, most I don't know the religious persuasions of all your listeners, but I mean, anyone could do that. You know, that doesn't require any metaphysics per se or theological commitments. I think that's just a good starting step for most people. And of course, you know, I think theology and a belief in God is going to aid that and supersede that in beautiful ways. But I think that's just a good starting point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes total sense. I'm going to attach in the show notes to this podcast a short lecture that I've written that someday I want to give to churches, especially, or give at churches. And it basically lays out what you just said. You don't necessarily need a religious or a specifically Christian or theistic worldview or paradigm in order to make that change, but it does those sorts of a function of religion is that it forces you out of yourself, or at least it should. So it makes it easier. It's at least one way to do that. Um, so just kind of covering the basics, this I obviously don't have time. It would be a whole nother episode or maybe series of episodes to unpack the full idea. But Thomas Nagel has a paper at the end of Christine Korsgaard's The Sources of Normativity, where he talks about how a moral point of view and a moral paradigm where you're not the center of the world actually is inescapable upon deep reflection. So he calls the paradigm or view of the world where you consider yourself equal to others the external point of view. And so the external point of view is if you were to imagine you step outside of yourself and look down at the sum total of the world from a God's eye perspective, you see yourself as connected to all of the people around you and the earth. And so you're stepping external outside yourself and taking on that point of view, that vantage point. And when you take on that vantage point, you realize, oh, heck, I'm not that important. I'm a tiny speck of dust. Why should why should I prefer myself to that of others? Why should I consider myself to be more important? Why should my preferences and goals and desires trump everyone else's? Um, and he thinks he's a sort of neo-Kantian. He thinks that once you really deeply and consistently apply rationality to your thoughts, that you end up fully realizing I can't escape taking on that sort of ideal moral paradigm. And the argument's pretty simple. It's just that, um, look, you automatically, naturally, probably everyone does, take yourself to be intrinsically valuable and worthy of the respect of others. You consider yourself to be worthy of being treated as an end and not merely as a means by all other people. Okay, but there's also another principle of rationality, and it's like something like the similarity criteria. It's that, or the similarity principle. It's that if one thing with all of these properties X, Y, and Z has this other property, so let's say if I myself, in virtue of being a human being, have the property of um, intrinsic value or being worthy of respect for myself, why am I denying that of other human beings? They're the same sorts of entities as me. It's completely arbitrary and ad hoc to say that I'm the center of the universe. And so, if you're really thinking rationally, you're not going to make that sort of ad hoc assumption that, well, in my case, I'm more important than everyone else. I have an unequal value with everyone outside of me. Because it's not only arbitrary, but it would violate your own worth, because now consider it from another person's internal perspective. They're going to be playing the same game. They're going to be putting themselves above everybody else and believing and considering their own goals as more important than everybody else's. Well, but that means that if you don't have an obligation to see yourself as equal with them, then why should they see themselves as equal with you? You cannot demand respect for your own being from others if you are not willing to extend that. And it sounds like just a naive or complicated fancy way of putting the golden rule, but it's not. This is this type of argument is trying to show that it's logically or rationally inconsistent to consider yourself more important than other people. In doing that, you contradict yourself, because you're at the same time denying that of the other same types of beings. So that's the lecture goes more into that, but essentially that is one way without religion to move outside yourself if you reflect on those sorts of Kantian arguments. Um, the other aspect I think is that, like, yeah, the religious worldview is an important way of doing that and seeing everything as connected. And moving outside yourself, because if you believe in God and you believe God is going to judge you, you are forced to think more about, you are literally forced to think more from the external perspective of how God sees you, not just how you see you. So the death of God in culture has reduced the need, or has made it less frequent that we're forced to step outside of ourselves.
Right. Yeah, that's tragic. But yeah, I mean, hopefully people listening to this podcast will take those steps.
Yeah, maybe the one person who hears this will become a better person. Probably not. Anyone who probably
Yeah.
listens to this could be doing better things. So just by listening, they're bad people. But
I suppose so. Did you hear that,
yeah,
Phil? You suck. His name's Phil, right?
Phil.
Yeah, the one who listens. Phil.
No, I no.
You don't know his name?
All right. Thanks for joining me on this podcast, Danny. It's been a treat. Uh, yeah, I will see everyone later. Check the show notes. Danny, you want to leave with anything? You want to tell them about your movie podcast or anything like that?
Um, nah, don't listen to my podcast. It's really not that good. If you want, follow me on Twitter, Danny, DANNY HASBOUN, Hasboon. And I post some spicy stuff on there, and I have no followers, so I'd really appreciate 3. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night.